Well, here we are at the margins of the Goa Literature Festival, and our topic is, finding a voice, the margins, question mark. So actually what I find most interesting about the framing of the topic is the question mark. I'm very glad that it is there, because often borders and margins are drawn, but actually what appears as a clear and sharp line is actually a zone of transformation. And the clarity of a line actually does not exist in the reality on the ground. This may be true of places, one country to another, one state to another, one region to another. It may be true of languages, one language to another. A slow transformation, a gradual movement from one to another. It may even be true of something which seems as, at first appearance, simple a binary as gender, because it may slowly transition from one to the other. So, the first thought that strikes me is the idea of the margin itself and the center itself, and where the margin lies and how we look at it. I understand from the composition of this panel that it is supposed to talk about the Northeast as a marginal place in the imagination of the Indian Republic. And I understand that we are supposed to reflect on finding a voice. Now, we have, I think, there is definitely one example of the Northeast finding a voice, a very loud voice on television. The name of the man is Arnab Goswami. He's definitely from the Northeast, and he definitely has a voice. Dhruba, would you, to be, as provocative as Arnab to begin with, would you say that he is any kind of voice of or from the Northeast?
Yeah, good afternoon, Sam. I call Samrat Sam. And to the, I think, the huge audience here. We from the Northeast always have huge audiences. So Arnab Goswami has become an institution, perhaps for the wrong reason. But definitely, I would not like to, for something that is Indian or pan-Indian, I wouldn't like to call him someone from the Northeast as such. He's a television personality. He's supposed to be controversial. I mean, I don't find him controversial personally. Sometimes I look at his, listen to him. Sometimes I don't. But then, we have a problem, Sam, in this, that, the Northeast, or whenever I'm called to any festival, and there's very few, I'm hardly called. This is because perhaps there's a bit of nepotism thrown in here. I know Vivek and Damodar very well. They come to Guwahati. I offer them tea. Probably this this is one way of making me come here. But I've written my books. I love the readings I do, the pan-India literature, the literature from India, the ones from Latin America we had a while back. But then we are generally grooved into this marginal territory called the Northeast, which personally I find that we are overdoing it. We are called to a panel not to discuss about Socrates or even, Spanish literature or about what is happening. I think this is the first time Sam has asked about a personality that deals with, a TV channel covering the whole of India. But unfortunately, again, you have marginalized it by bracketing him within the Northeast. So it begins to, grate. It begins to eat into your psyche that you're inside a zoo, and Mona and I here are here to, to speak a kind of cultural language that is not. I'm not supposed to talk about Mona. She has just warned me off. So about me. In fact, I find it a bit difficult at times. It's more important that I'm free to talk, not just about the construed zoo that I am in. So that is the margin which I would like to escape from, and perhaps Arnab Goswami has escaped from that margin.
But has he escaped by becoming the voice of the center, is the question. No, what is the mode of escape?
I don't think he's a voice of the center at all, Samrat. I beg to disagree on that.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay. So when we talk about finding a voice, it is also about the particularity, about retaining a certain character, right? So how do we find that voice in the first place, which is somehow rooted and authentic and is also available to a wider audience, is perhaps the question.
Yeah, you see, like, a fiction writer like me, for example, we have to depend upon a locale. We need a geographical base upon which to work upon, and then the cultural base. And by virtue of the fact that I'm familiar with my home territory, I'm using the word home because I'm in that territory where the cuisine is different, the dress is different, the language is different, the sentiments are sometimes different, the political construct is different, Sam. And hence, because I'm familiar with that, I draw my plot, my characters from that region, from that area. But there are many writers from Assam, from Mizoram. I mean, I don't know. I'm from the rest. I'm scared to use Mizoram now because that's Mona's territory. There are plenty of writers. Kaushik Barua, who's written a fantastic book called The Winged Horse on Tibet. Brilliant book, I feel. So he's an Assamese, but he's not called a Northeasterner or an Assamese writer. Then we have others too. Jahnavi Barua, who's based in Bangalore. Janice Parriott, who's in Delhi. All of us, the Deep Jyoti Sharma, who's a brilliant poet based in Delhi, who writes about the Northeast paradigm as well as the rest of the world or the country. And hence, because we are there, at least I am there, and then they say this gentleman is writing about the Northeast, hence he's a Northeasternist. He's a writer who can only dwell with those topics, subjects, sentiments, desires, which are based locally. But then, you have the other side of the coin, which says that these 12 emotions that govern mankind, where the psychologists say that there are 12 major emotions that govern us. These are applicable to all over the world. And hence, we seek the writers out of a sense of perhaps egoism, out of a sense of reaching out to people, what you call the universality of our writings. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. It could be good luck, it could be your talent, it could be a merit, it could be a demerit, whatever it is. And that is what my understanding of the whole situation is.
Mona, are you a Mizo writer? Are you a Northeastern writer, or are you a writer?
Thank you, Dhruba. And I have, it's not a question that has ever arisen. And to answer that, I'll have to just go back to something that was said yesterday at one of the sessions, Prajwal, I think, who said that the whole talk was about the mainland, as we say, called the rest of India, vis-a-vis the northeastern region. And he echoed my sentiments, which is that there is no vis-a-vis anything, because we are not, at least a section of us is simply not thinking about, whether or not our voices are found by the rest of India or not. So, that has never arisen. I've never thought, am I a Mizo? I've never had any problems about those identity conflicts as such. So, and in fact, Prajwal went a step further and he said exactly what I would have said, which is that as we go around demolishing the canon, the literary canon that we have been brought up to venerate, including me in school, of the Western literature, and we have also a monolithic Indian literature canon, whether it's writings in English or it's in regional, mostly writings in English. So, it's something that I think we keep constructing, and I think it's a phantasm, because it doesn't really matter. Of course, you could say that as a writer, if you're not read, what is the point of writing? Which is a very valid point. But at the same time, there is definitely a subset of writers from the northeastern region who don't really give much of a damn about whether or not it's getting out. So it's there. I know it doesn't really answer your question, but that's how we think about it.
So Dhruba seems to be suggesting that we are misplacing ourselves as marginal in a certain sense, that we are not really, and so would you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with the way you phrased it. We are not putting ourselves in the margins or anything, and in fact, I think that's why the question is there. The margins, which was, of course, the organizers being diplomatic about it. But there is no question about margins, because where we live, that is the center of where we are. And the rest of India would be a margin for us, for that matter.
Absolutely.
That's the way I put it.
So,
When I was in school in kindergarten or even up to class 3, we had this very, very Foster books. We had the margins on both sides. And you couldn't write there. It was meant for the teacher to give you marks or to write home that this guy is not doing well. So if you bring that to literature, you're still being taught. But when you write, I'm a fiction writer, I don't follow those margins. Mental margins, subconscious margins, the psychological imprints of how to decipher a plot or to work out a plot or to decipher a character. Because once, like I think that's what Jerry said today, if you are constrained by these suppositions or by these understandings, subtle or obvious, then your writing is poorer by that extent. The essential thing about writing, again I repeat fiction, is that you got to have freedom. And then you are marginalized. You can suppose, like, I want to write about a short story based in a bus station in Bangalore, and someone says, "Oh, this guy, he's from Guwahati. How the hell can he write about Bangalore, a story in bus station about a beggar there? It's not possible. It's fake."
But it does happen that, for example, somebody from the West is automatically accepted as being, capable of writing about India, for example. But the reverse doesn't seem to operate. That is also there.
No, we have had this struggle between the Occident and the Orient for centuries. I think we still have that brown sahib attitude, and I think it's to do with even the English language that we use. I mean, back home, when I go back to my village, which is in Upper Assam, near the Myanmar border, very few in the village understand English. So when they say this guy writes in English, they feel that, it's something very unusual. Is it because I was taught in an English medium school? Is it because, I feel myself elitist? Or is it because, I want to reach out to a bigger readership? What propels me or compels me to write in this language? So then they assume or presume that I'm more occidentalized. I'm more towards the Western hemisphere, whereas my heart is totally here. So that duality or that fusion, Sam, whichever you look at it, also is a lovely, touchstone for your creativity. Someone, I think, in one of these interactions we had, this was talked about. How creative can a creative writer be? You depend upon conflicts, not necessarily the First World War or the Second World War or the ISIS conflict. The conflict is every day, every moment there with you. It's how you pick it. Anyway.
Munna, would you like to add something to that? No, what I'm saying is that, even within, say, India, for example, or anywhere, it's basically, it's normal for people to think that a Westerner can write about India, but the reverse is not often.
I remember the question, sorry, I just forgot about it, but that was what I mentioned about demolishing the canon that we have inherited of Western literature, the great authors, say Charles Dickens or Shakespeare or whatever. But you really, I'm not saying they're not good or anything. What I'm saying is that the previously colonized countries, the empire struck back, it wrote back after the colonial powers had left. And we began to find our voices, and within that we also practiced this again hierarchy of the marginal and the central and so on. And I'm just saying that it does matter, of course it exists, but at the same time, I don't think, for example, I cannot speak for Dhruba, but for most of us when we write, we are not thinking about, is it going to reach a broader audience or anything like that? Is it going to reach the rest of the mainland, as we say? No. So, as I said, where we are is where the center is, and we write about that.
So
and so when we destroy, when we start deconstructing that Western canon that has been handed down to us and that we have accepted, and now we are saying, okay, no, maybe these writers aren't as great as we thought that they were. And we look around, and many of the, for example, in India, writers are much better than those writers that we were brought up to think of as great, to esteem. And so that's also, I mean, even within India, that is what is happening again. And I'm saying that this is something that is simply very, very subjective. And for me, it does not really exist.
Okay. There's also this matter of the center and the periphery in terms of form. So, for example, right now the favored form is, of course, Netflix and Amazon Prime and cinema as forms of storytelling. Then there's the novel and the book, and it's forms of expression, literary expression, the poem. Do you find, because you're a poet, do you find poetry to be somehow pushed to the margins?
Poetry has always been pushed to the margins. That is nothing new. And I think, perversely, I think people who write poetry because it is marginal. We don't really want that kind of, huge attention or anything. We are content to be just kind of neglected, a little bit neglected, so that we have the freedom to do whatever we want to. If you're in the limelight, if you're in the spotlight, you're really scrutinized, and we escape that kind of scrutiny. So don't give our secret away, please.
Okay. Dhruba, when you were speaking just now, you mentioned this, the place that you come from, which is not Guwahati, it's somewhere in, okay, it's Sibsagar, I didn't know that. And so it brings me again to another way of looking at the idea of center and periphery, which is, of course, that every center has a periphery. And that, since we are talking in a time where the ideas of what is central and what is peripheral, who belongs and who does not, are so vital. So, can we reflect a little bit about the issues of identity in Assam itself? Who belongs and who does not?
See, Sam, this is one, you have a legal implication to that question, and also an implication which is not legal. I mean, it's open. The legality part, we know it's to do with the NRC and with the CAB. So that's obvious to all. But then, the feeling of being alien, the feeling of being an outsider, there have been numerous topics on this, the insider as the outsider and the outsider as the insider. I think you have gone through that. At least I've gone through the last 2-3 years in the seminars we have had in Guwahati, in the Guwahati University, SP University. There's a book too that's been edited by, I think, Pretty Gill, or was it Dhruba Hazarika? Pretty, right, Mona? So they have this thing about the insider as the outsider and the outsider as insider. I've never felt like that. And I can only speak from a personal perspective, not from a political understanding, because I'm not necessarily a political commentator. But Sam, I feel that being a part of India is beautiful. I think most of us here, we have traveled widely outside or maybe inside. And nothing can be as beautiful as the kind of being free, which sometimes is again suspect, not really catered to. But then being an Indian is beautiful, I think. And whether you are in the south of India or, again, I'm speaking for, I mean, hopefully so, at least when I was in Bangalore for a year and a half, I felt as much as an Indian as I felt when I've been in Shillong, where I grew up and when I was born, when I studied, or in Guwahati, where I had my workplace. I've never felt alien anywhere. The only time I have felt this is when my language, there is this peculiar thing about India is that your language is supposedly your identity after your religion. So if I speak in English in a Namghar, in a religious place in Upper Assam, in my village, it's not done. And if I were to speak Assamese in a Rabindra Sangeet gathering in Victoria Hall, Hemanta, I would probably be not wanted. India is a 740 languages. In the Northeast, we have 142 dialects and languages. And Hindi is not everybody's cup of tea or the sophisticated cup of tea. We have a bazaar Hindi. And somewhere because the Christian missionaries had done a commendable work with the schooling there, I think the middle class, the lower middle class, the middle class, the upper middle class, everybody wants his son or daughter to be in an English medium school, which has happened for the last 75 odd years. So to that extent, language has been, it has given a certain seam, stitched the 142 different tribes in the Northeast, and which makes us that much more free. So Sam, to make it, I'm giving a long answer because nobody had asked me that as such before, that insider, outsider thing along with the linguistic part, the religious part, I feel okay everywhere in India. And as much as I feel in Guwahati, I'm feeling fine here. So I don't really, I couldn't really probably get the hang of your question as such, but I took it the way I did in my reply.
Okay. Muna, would you like to reflect on this?
Well, actually, now that the attention of the center has turned to the Northeast, I would rather that it didn't, politically speaking. You as a journalist must be very aware of much more than I, of what is going on in each of the states of the Northeastern region. And Mizoram isn't free of it either. So I wish, in fact, right now, if I would happily be in the margins right now, because that is one way that we might be able to kind of just stay away from that kind of political attention which is going to drive us apart, rip every one of us apart, because this is what it has been doing in the rest of India. So, but in terms of finding a voice, yeah, as I said, well, I could say that Goa itself is on the margins for me. I don't know much about the place as such, very superficial knowledge of it and so on. Delhi, for example, I've lived there briefly, but I would never say that it's, it's simply not central to me at all. So, and I'm happy when other people read or like what I've written. But apart from that, it really doesn't matter. And right now, I would say that being obscure, or rather being in the shadows and concealed, is perhaps a form of strategy to be adopted at this moment in time.
Okay, well, that's an interesting thought. Lie low and bide your time. Crouching tiger, indeed. There was one other aspect, of this whole business of margin, which I tried to circle around and come back to. So I'll come back to it more directly this time, which is the idea that, that to every center there is a periphery. So where there is for example, there's a London and a New York, and then there's a Delhi and Dhaka, the hierarchy of places, as it were, on the world. And then there's a Guwahati and a Sibsagar, and then there's a Guwahati and an Aizawl. But beyond that also, even Aizawl is a center, and to the center there is a periphery. And there is a strong Mizo identity, and beyond that there are others. So, who are the marginal in Mizoram? And what is their status?
Well, that's a pretty weighty question. Of course, we have some, I hate calling them minorities, but smaller non-Mizo communities within Mizoram. And, those would be the Chakmas, for example. I assume you're talking about those. And the Bru, who are politically quite active and wanting to carve out their own homeland and all that. I mean, there's been some movement over there, which of course is opposed by Mizos. So, and that's what I'm saying. That is a wedge that certain forces can always enter and disrupt, find a way to disrupt what has been all this a very peaceful societies. And you wanted to know which are the marginalized within Mizoram. Of course, those are not marginalized as such. They are smaller communities. But we'll have been living more or less happily together. It's just that it's one of the ironies of life that the moment you find a sense of identity of your own, you want a homeland, so to say. And then, of course, then the fighting starts. The squabbling and the disputes and the acrimony. And those can always be exploited by a certain factors, certain actors. And those have started entering the Northeast. And that's why I said, please, I would rather not have this attention at all. And not that we can go back to whatever we were. So that would be my answer to what you asked.
Dhruba, would you like to reflect on this, or would you like to speak on this?
So once again, Sam, I was slightly inattentive. I was watching that. What was the basic question?
So basically, I'm saying that every center has a periphery, and I'm saying that
Yeah, now I got it. You're talking about the Mizoram identity, but I think that's her territory.
And so on for every other
place. You
place.
see, it's like this. You know very well. I think the audience who are not very familiar with the Northeast is a mini India by itself. None of the states is basically happy with the other. Arunachal has a border problem with Assam. Mizoram was born out of Assam. Manipur, of course, with Nagaland. Nagaland with Assam again. Then Tripura has with Bangladesh. That's, of course, a foreign country. They are fighting either over the geographical areas in the margins, that is, the geographical areas demarcating one from the other. They're always fighting. We are always fighting at the political level. But otherwise, we share the same dais, Thereafter, we have this linguistic problem. In Assam, it began with the Bengali, Assamese, the so-called imposition of the Bengali language on the Assamese, which later on became Assamese full-fledged Assamese in the educational institutions as well as in the government departments. Meghalaya, it was carved out of Assam in 1972. So you see this festering, we are known as the Northeasterners, and to a good extent we can be clubbed together, but for heaven's sake, each of the states has its own identity. This identity is basically very strong, and we are very sensitive about it. Somebody, if a Mizo or a Naga were supposed to, say something a bit odd about the Assamese will feel bad, in as much as the Mizo or the Naga will feel bad. Very, very high-strung about it. Within Assam, we have 12 major tribes: the Hajongs, the Ravas, the Boros, the Karbis, the Missings, you name it, we have it. And each of them is very strong. Each of these tribes are strong in what sense? Not perhaps that physical Bruce Lee way, but in the type of, the culturally very strong. Their dresses, their songs, incredibly strong. My forefathers, we belong to it's not a caste, we are supposed to belong, this Kolitas, we belong to Hemant will probably know, it's Kolitas. So my forefathers, my village is about 1200 years old, with the same characters in that same place, with the same old, psychological deficiencies, with the same old, intermarriages, marriages, things like that, and spread out only about 500 years back. So these people, Kolitas for example, they are very sensitive about, at least my forefathers were, about getting their progenies married off to the Kuch, for example. Why? Nobody knows. It's like, it's racism within Assam. It's like, this tribe doesn't get married to that tribe. if I can, since nobody's here from Nagaland, I don't know about Mizoram, but the tribes there, the Lothas, the Aos, the Angamis, the Pumais, just to name 4, they were at loggerheads with one another for centuries, until, we probably anglicized ourselves, and we felt that, there were divisions between hills. There was this hill from here for 3 kilometers, then a valley, then the next valley was another 3 kilometers, and in each of these hills was a tribe with fortresses or with rivers, and there was no intermarriages. There was warfare. So some people made, the best use out of it to divide and, rule, etc., etc. But I'm not going to that. What I'm trying to say is that, Sam, the Northeast, including Assam, my state, I hate saying it's my state, it's everyone's state that way, because I stay in India. You're welcome to Assam, for example, that way. But then it's not an easy place to define. Believe me, it's not an easy place to define. And I'm saying this not with authority, but with experience, based out of experience. And it's nothing to do with academics, not that I've done a lot of reading on the nuances or on what she had said about deconstructing the entire scenario about marginality of borderlines or borders or geography or caste or religion or race or physiognomy or ethnicity. Nothing of that sort. It's just that you read the newspapers for 10 years or 5 years continuously, you know where you're at. And the brass tack understanding is that it's not an easy place. It's not an easy place not to stay in, but it's not an easy place to understand very easily.
Okay.
Dhruba, if you don't mind, I'll just, one small, addition or correction or something. No. When you said that Mizoram or Meghalaya was born out of Assam, well, I think I cannot speak for the Khasis, they're not here, but they would probably, I would dispute it, because that's something that came from the British, actually.
Okay, you're putting it on the British.
Yeah, I'm putting it on the British. We were not part of Assam at any point.
Why I said Assam, because you see now we have a nomenclatural understanding called the Assam Rifles. The Assam Rifles are manned 90% by non-Assamese. But when there's some kind of brutality done in Manipur by the Assam Rifles, the Hazarikas like me get a real beating. So it's, and again, the Assam was Greater Assam. So, okay, the British came in, the Treaty of Yandabo was signed in 1826, and thereafter we had everything going. We put the fault with the British, and it's true, that's going back to history. That way you got to go back to even the Mahabharata probably. But coming down to, this immediate situation, it's from Assam this was carved out, and it was again basically because of the linguistic understanding. If in the Barak Valley, for example, Assam, in the Barak Valley, we have 2 major rivers. In Assam, we have 168 rivers. Out of the 2 major rivers are the Barak and the Brahmaputra. The Barak Valley is occupied by Bengali-speaking people, 70% of whom are basically refugees from East Pakistan. And in the Brahmaputra Valley, it's the Bengali and the Assamese. The Bengalis in the Barak Valley do not have, much of, it's probably, it would be profane to say it probably, and it's not really politically correct. But there's no love lost between the 2 communities when it comes down to, I was posted, for example, in the Barak Valley, that's near the Bangladesh border, and I asked my Boro Babu, the superintendent, where's your son? Oh, my son is in Assam. Whereas the Barak Valley, Karimganj, Hailakandi, and Silchar are actually a part and parcel of the 26 districts of Assam. So the psychological tuning is such that you're within your own state, yet you say that they are in Assam, not really so there. So I'm slightly exaggerating this. It's not so much now. This is probably about 30 years back when I was posted there, and I'm drawing it from my experience. So Mona, I stand corrected to that extent. So we are basically got to put the British at fault.
So I think we are running out of time. So what you mentioned about somebody in Silchar probably or Karimganj saying they're going to Assam when they're going to the Brahmaputra Valley. Yesterday we heard about people from some time back from Nagaland, when somebody went to India, to the mainland, they would say going to India. So centers and margins I guess will always be there. And do we have any time left, or are we out of time? We've got apparently, well, there's a time out there, so I think one if anybody has, otherwise we'll wrap up and head off. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you, gentlemen. Not only lessons in literature, but history and geography too. Very interesting. Thank you, sir.